Hit her with a verse, then another verse, it's another hearse, I bye. So when you in church and you hear the word, pray it all connect just like Wi-Fi. There's no need.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 991 podcast. I am your sister Lex.
Sister, yes.
How's everybody doing? Thank you for tuning in. As we know, today I'm going to speak a little bit on my testimony, but as usual, before we even get into it, we want to pray. It's been quite a week. Before I even start praying, I want to say that the prayer that I'm going to pray is because my testimony is basically referencing off of my book, Changing Babylon. And when I started writing this book, there was a lot of spiritual warfare. So before I go into this testimony, I want to actually read the prayer out of this book. Of course, I'm going to fashion it to an all-inclusive prayer for everybody listening, for everybody tuning in, to cover us all, as well as me and my sister during this testimony. Dear Heavenly Father, as we reference this book and my testimony, Father, and you speak your truth and love and forgiveness through all of this, Lord, to give this testimony for your kingdom purpose as you see fit. For anyone who hear it and read it once this book is available, I ask for your forgiveness for any sins that may have put us outside of your will for our life. Help us to continue to forgive those who we may find hard to forgive when recalling the memories and revealing this testimony. Lord, you are our God, our vindicator, and justice is yours. Help us to love and show kindness no matter where you lead us. Father, let those hearing this or ever reading this understand that this is not a coincidence, but your will, a way to reach your merciful hand to them so that they can know that no matter what they have done or said, they are never too far gone. No matter what painful and traumatic events the enemy may use to hinder their lives, thoughts, and emotions, you use everything in their lives, our lives, for the good of your kingdom. Lord, you are the shot caller, the creator of the heavens and the earth. Without you, we are nothing. You are Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. And above all things, we glorify your name. You show your hand in the lives that you have chosen to be servants, that no matter what they may come up against, they continually seek after your Son, Jesus Christ, who are glorified, and they are blessed. Father, we ask you to give the peace beyond their understanding, comfort to know that you are a God of justice and love, that no matter their pain, trauma, doubts, fears, rejection, guilt, and any other weapon the enemy has formed against their very souls, that you and you alone are a powerful life changer, chain breaker, and annihilator of every and all evil, the healer and protector of your children that choose you in their free will, that you, O Lord, gave us because you love us. Father, help those who are persecuted because they believe. I ask that you order those in your kingdom to be on post for your loving work and their God-given purpose to touch the lives of those who feel burdened by their iniquities. Help us to know that you always want to hear from us, that because of the good Father you are, there is nothing that can separate us from you. Though the world seeks to destroy us, your word stands firm because of your love for us. Your children know your voice. We know that we were made for such a time as this, that we came to this world with a purpose, as it states in your word in Jeremiah 1:5. Before we were formed in our mother's womb, you knew us. Before we were born, you consecrated us and appointed us prophets to the nation. Father, I ask that you not only use this testimony to transform and reach the hearts of your chosen ones, but also that you continue to do your good work in me. Father, I bind up any plot, plan, ploy, or trap of the enemy that has been formed against me or anybody listening under the sound of my voice. Any curses spoken our way to stop this testimony from being delivered for your kingdom, I cast down any imaginations that try to exalt themselves above you, Father, and send them to the pit of hell. I ask for your Holy Spirit to fill my whole being, our whole being, as they listen, Father. I ask for your protection over my listeners, our families, our children, our homes, and our property. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, well, where do I begin? I know that since I came to the Lord in 2019 and coming into this ministry, there have been a lot of people that I've connected with, that the Lord has connected me to. When I first came into ministry, I was connected with a woman. She was basically a minister to teach deliverance, healing, and things like that. And when I came into her university, she was teaching us the purpose of pain, the purpose of suffering, the purpose of what the enemy does and how the enemy attacks us in our lives. You know, I thank her. I thank the Lord for guiding me to her. Everybody after that, I've been in a couple ministries. I have a pretty good idea of what that looks like. And the Holy Spirit has always guided me, spoke to me as far as like what is right, what is not, in the most honoring of ways, or, you know, with me honoring the people above me. When I first started writing this book, I'm going to say that when I say warfare, when the Lord delivered me out of my trauma from my mother's house, first of all, I was raised by my mother. She was a single mother. She divorced my father when I was really young. I had to be like around 5 or 6 when he left. My earliest memory of that was me in a hallway where, like my mom was on one end and my dad was on the other, and they were pulling my arm and they were fighting over me. I can't imagine what I felt in that moment at 5 years old. I know that at that time, I really wish that I would have went with my dad. My grandmother is who I kind of grew up around on a regular basis. She had establishments. She was very well put together, very well spoken, self-educated. That woman could pick up a book and read from the cover to cover in like a matter of 3 hours. And I'm talking like 1,000-page books. I grew up around her in bars, learning the ways of the world, alcoholism, which is something that runs in my family, a lot of trauma, a lot of void filling. My mom, she was a very hurt woman. And, I say that with a lot of honor and respect because I do love my mother. No matter what she's ever done, I know that we can only love from a place of what we have. And if we don't have it, we can't give it. But when we're young, we don't understand that. We think that, you should be able to, and there's no excuse. And now that I'm older, I can see, through everything that's been fragmented as I grew up, how that has affected me, even in my own personal life with my children. And, the same grace that I ask from them, I'm willing to give to my mother, because that's what I want in exchange. The Lord gave me grace, He gave me forgiveness, He gave me understanding, and I wasn't always right. I was one of them children that I knew when I was wrong and I knew when I was right. But at the same time, I wasn't extremely rebellious. I did a lot of people pleasing, always wanting to please my mom, always wanting to be good enough for my mom. My mom, like I said, my grandmother, my grandfather, my real grandfather, my paternal grandfather, before my grandmother remarried, he was probably the first positive role model, male role model that I ever had, and the last. Growing up with my mother, I remember there was a lot of like abuse, rape, and molestation in my family. And I was going to Catholic school when I was younger. They kind of knew my family. I had cousins that went to the same school that I went to. They were going through like a whole thing with the police and DCFS and stuff like that. And when I was going to school, I didn't know anything. I was young. I probably maybe like third grade, second, third grade, somewhere around there. Well, while this was going on behind the scenes with my cousin and my aunt, my mom's sister, I remember a nun pulling me out of class. It was an art class. I loved art, by the way. I've always been very drawn to it. I had purple marker on my face, and the nun pulled me out of class and asked me if my mom had hit me. And I told her, no, my mom doesn't hit me. I remember it was that traumatic that I remember. I was like, no. She's like, you could tell me. She's like, it's okay. You could tell me, if your mom hits you. I was like, my mom doesn't hit me. But if you tell her that I told you that she hits me, she's gonna hit me. You know what I mean? Like that's how my mom was. Well, lo and behold, I guess I went home that day. My mom picked me up and everything like that. I remember the dark brown wood on the walls. I remember she was screaming at me and she's like, you told them that I beat you. And she pulled out this extension cord and started slashing me all up and down my legs. I had slash marks, like cuts, because she hit me so hard up and down both sides of my legs, on both legs, up and down. I was bawling my eyes out. I was scared out of my mind. Like I said, I was like in second grade, and that wasn't enough. Like she was so upset that she grabbed me by my throat and picked me up against them wooden walls off of my feet. And I was like choking, and she told me, she apologized like years later after, denying it so many times. I think that it hurt her too much, to actually remember, or want to remember. My mom doesn't, it's hard for her to accept accountability. And that's fine. I remember she told me, she's like, the only reason why I let you go was because I seen the fear in your eyes. After that, I wound up with DCFS for about, I would say, a good 9 months, because I remember I was there like during different holidays, and my mom and my stepfather would come and visit me. Yeah, my mom and my stepfather got together when I was like about 7, pretty close to around this time. I think they might have just met when this happened. He was abusive. He actually, how they met was he was sent to kill my mother. and he came walking into the bar, my grandmother's bar establishment, and he asked her who she was. I don't know like all the intimate details or anything like that. I found out later on, in my life that he was sent to kill her. My stepfather, he's Sicilian. He was very angry, I would say. And like his story was that his parents died when he was young, so his parents dying when he was young and then going and staying with his aunts, and then his aunts didn't want him. So he was like basically an orphan on the streets, going through that. I can only imagine how much anger, how much pain that was going through. When my mother met him, she wound up getting pregnant with my sister. My sister's 8.5 years younger than me. It was always the constant sibling rivalry. My mother would treat her better. My mother would give her more attention. And, at the time, it was like my grandfather had just passed away, like right before my sister was born. So I was healing from that. And I don't think my mom knew that I was like really reeling and going through it. I remember it was like I was like 8 years old, and I went to this funeral home where my grandfather laid dead in a casket. And I got up from the chair, kind of walked towards the casket. I mean, I knew he wasn't coming back. It was a reality for me. I kneeled because I saw my mom kneel like in front of the casket. She was praying. And then, I don't think I was praying, but I kind of did the gestures. And I just turned to my mom and I told her, I was like, Mom, can I give him a kiss? And I remember I got up because she told me, she's like, yeah, this is where we say goodbye. My mom had her moments where she was very understanding, very loving, and then it would just be like a switch up. That's how like the demonic really does work through people. I mean, even in myself, I've seen that going along this journey. Yeah, I got up and I kissed him on the forehead, and he was like very, very cold. I remember before he passed away, I would see him in my grandmother's dining room area, and he would be laying on this hospital bed, and he would have to use the washroom through like a colostomy bag, or I think that's what it's called, colostomy bag or something like that. And because he couldn't use the washroom on his own, my cousin would come and give him like the morphine for pain. This bar that my grandma had owned at the time, grandmother was into witchcraft, and she would have these books in the house, and she would do like these prayers, and you know what I mean, like how they integrate it and they make it seem like it's Jesus, but it's really not. Prayers for good luck, prayers for money. She used to tell me, she used to be like, oh, you take holy water and you sprinkle it in the southeast corner of every room, and you know what I mean. She's like, so for you have protection. And I was just like, yeah, okay, sounds good. That's my grandmother. I remember I got pretty interested in it later on in life, like when I was like 14. But at that time I wasn't, I didn't really know too much about it. I know that when me and my friends, we were mischievous. I was always on some type of adventure when I was younger. We broke into my grandmother's garage, and I remember we crawled up in like the top space of the garage, and we seen a pentagram written on the board floor. And I was like, what is that? And one of my friends was like, oh, that's witchcraft. That's, your grandmother's a witch. And I was like, my grandmother is not a witch. I was like, don't. And like back then we were just like witches, like with the wart on your nose and green face, you know what I mean? The hat, no, I was like, my grandma's not a witch. Then I remember one night I was sleeping. I fell asleep in the dining room or the living room. I had this dream, and this is when it first started, like my dreams first started. It just the prophetic, I didn't realize it back then. I was really young. Like I said, this was probably around like maybe 9, 10 years old. And I was dreaming, and it was like pitch black in my dream. And then all of a sudden I seen like this little white light. It was a little circle, and it started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden I started noticing that something was like spinning and spinning and spinning. And like it was going like super fast, and it just started getting closer and closer. And then all of a sudden it was like whack, and it was a Ouija board. I woke up and I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't yell. I couldn't nothing. I was just, and I felt like there was something there. Like I felt like there was something there, like holding me down. Like I was wide awake. I couldn't do anything. And in that house, or in that bar, because it was like a bar and there was like a house connected to the back of it, we spent a lot of time here. I spent a lot of time here growing up with my mom and my grandmother. I mean, I remember one day I was sitting in the same area, the same living room, in the chair, and I was looking into the room like right in front of me. I was eating my cake, and I seen just like my cousin used to live in that room, and I seen the blow dryer and the curling iron just like fly across the floor. And my grandmother had a black cat named Midnight. And I was like, it's got to be the cat. There ain't no way that that stuff is just going to happen like that. So I get up and I go, I go into this room and I'm looking around for this cat, and the cat is nowhere to be found. At that point, I feel this cold tension, anxiety in that room. Something just told me to get out. I ran out and I just went like wherever there were people, wherever my grandmother was or wherever, because I didn't want to be alone. From that point on, I just couldn't be alone in the back there, like at night on the weekends, my parents would go up by the front bar where, like other family would be drinking, partying, having a good time. You would hear the jukebox and everything like that. And I was a kid, so they were like, "Oh, you can't be up here. It's adult time, so you're gonna go in the back." So they would say, "Take me in the back," and I had a room in the back. And I remember I would lay down in this room, and like we had the sliding doors for the closets, but the sliding doors were mirrors. So like I would be so terrified sleeping in that room, like on my side looking at them, because my eyes would play tricks on me if they were playing tricks on me, because I saw so many things, so many stories from that place. People couldn't even keep pets there, like their pets would run away. My cousin moved in there and like the buttons were popping off of his couch, his leather couch. His dog took off running away. Like there was just so many things. My grandmother said that she was sleeping one day, something pulled the covers off of her and was like, "Oh," she pulled them back up. It was insane. These are the things that happen when you play with that type of stuff. You don't realize what doors you're opening up. And then it's like you're using witchcraft to try and come against witchcraft. And that's pretty much what they would do. Oh, you just need salt. You know what I mean? Here's holy water. Here's this. So they were putting their faith in things that were not God. As I continued to grow up, my mom was very like depressed. She was always drinking. And I was never really one to have a lot of friends because I was afraid of how she would react or what she would do, around my friends. And I remember one time I tried to have a girlfriend of mine, spend the night. Her name was Nadia. She came and she spent the night. And my mom was drunk and she started like embarrassing me in front of her. I was upset. I was like maybe like 13. I told her, I was like, "Mom," I was like, "Dude, like you make me feel like I don't even want to be here." And I remember at the moment that I said that, she went in the kitchen, she grabbed the knife, she put it against her throat and started chasing me around the table, telling me, "Oh, you think you want to die? You think your life is so bad? You want to commit suicide?" And like right in front of my friend. And that was traumatizing. And ever since then, I was like, I don't want to have any friends around my family. And I would feel like she would do this on purpose. Like when my sister would invite her friends over, she'd be so friendly, but it was like I was isolated. There was really nobody that could help me or come around me, but a lot of people growing up, like my friends' mothers or my friends themselves would be like, "Man, you have to get the hell out of that house." You know what I mean? Like you have to get out of that house. As I got older, my grandmother remarried to my step grandfather. He seemed nice, and at that time, like I started smoking when I was 11 years old through peer pressure. I lived in Park Forest. I was like, yeah, I was 11. It was this kid, Chuck, and we were all like, they used to do like BMX bikes in the woods and stuff like that. And we happened to be sitting down and he's like, "Hey," he's like, "You want a cigarette?" And I remember it was a Newport Short. I remember that was the first cigarette that I was ever offered. I was like, yeah, like I wanted to be cool. So I was like, okay. So I started smoking it. And then after that, like my mom found out and she was upset. So she made me like lick this cigar, made me smoke the whole thing. And unfortunately, that didn't stop me from wanting to smoke. So then after that, when my grandmother remarried my step grandfather, he would buy me the cigarettes and put them up on top of the bookcase. And I would just grab them. Nobody knew. He would just buy them for me. I would put them in my book bag. And that's how I wound up getting addicted to cigarettes. My grandmother didn't know anything about it. But then it got to the point where it got creepy. There was one time I was going out with my friends and I was leaving and I was coming out of that back room where I told you that I would sleep. And he was sitting there watching TV in the living room. There was like a living room, a dining room, and then in front of the living room where he was a bedroom. In front of the dining room was a bedroom. In the kitchen, then there was a bedroom. That was the setup. And I came out of there from getting dressed and everything like that. And in our culture, being Hispanic, it was like, "Oh, I'm leaving. You give a kiss on the cheek and you leave." I didn't think anything of it. So he's like, "Give me a kiss," and I was like, "Okay," so I walked over there, but something just felt uneasy in my chest. But I was just I was like, "No, he's not like that." but I just couldn't shake it. So when I went up to him and I went to go and give him a kiss on the cheek, he turned his face and he tried to like put his tongue in my mouth. Yeah, it was pretty disgusting. After that, I felt uneasy. I wound up going out anyways. And I think I told my friend, you know, what had happened. And she's like, you need to tell your mom. And I was like, okay. I wasn't scared to tell my mom. You know, I had told my mom about a neighbor when I was younger. I went to go and hang out with a neighbor's daughter that I had always hung out with on a regular. Her grandparents would always be home. Never had I ever had an incident until this one time where I was playing tag with her and there was a garage and then there's like a shed and in between that there's like a little where we would hide and we would run around right there. And I remember I was running through there and he had grabbed me and put his hand like up my shirt, you know, and I went home. I told my mother, we pressed charges, you know. So when this happened with my grandfather, I was like, well, my mom is gonna, you know what I mean? She's gonna have my back, you know, like I didn't feel that fear. But when I went to her and I told her, my mom went directly to my grandmother. And then my grandmother, you know how it is in Hispanic families, you know what I mean? Like, and then my grandmother went and told my aunt. And then my aunt was like, oh, you're a liar. You're trying to break up this family. And like, it just got way out of hand. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to shut up. I'm not going to say anything. And nothing really came of it. You know what I mean? Like, they just swept it under the rug. After that, I mean, I'm kind of like bouncing around a little bit all over the place, but to bring me back to, you know, when I was in DCFS for like 9 months, you know, which was prior to all of this, you know, I remember seeing my mom. And even though she did what she did, like I still wanted to go home because my mom wasn't known for like beating me or abusing me or anything like that. So this was like a first time this ever happened. Little did I know, you know, as I got older, I found out that, you know, like I had a brother. My mom had to give up for adoption. You know, that's not really my story to tell, but my mother was drinking because she was hurt by this. She couldn't, she, in her mind, she's like, I didn't want to raise your brother in our family. Your grandmother was very mentally and emotionally abusive. Just thinking back on that, you know, like just the generational stuff in the family was was pretty tormenting and didn't even realize it until, you know, I came into ministry and, you know, deliverance and healing. The grace of God is amazing, you know, because going through this and talking about this, I see how he was there in like every step of the way as I speak, as it's coming out of my mouth and going to the viewers, going to you guys. He puts this vision in my head like I was there. I was there too. I was there too. And it's pretty amazing how great God is. You know, even though when you're going through it and you don't know him yet, you don't know who he is, he has the timing of when he's going to bring you to him. All this was not for nothing. As I got older, I started getting into witchcraft because I felt powerless. I didn't have control. So the only way that I thought that I could change my circumstances was like how my grandma taught me. She's like, oh, read this prayer. It's for this, do that. And I started noticing like patterns throughout my life. Like I would only get so far, boom, I would hit the ground, I'd have to start over. I would get so far, boom, I would hit the ground and I have to start over. Things seemed to be looking up and then boom, not so much anymore. I watched my stepfather abuse my mother as time went on. And my sister, you know, like my grandmother would always tell me, hey, you know, you protect your mother and your sister. Nobody else is going to protect them. And I carried that. I carried that with me up until like, I want to say 3 years ago, maybe two, because, you know, like I didn't have a brother. I always wished for a brother. I always wanted a brother. And then when I found out that I did have a brother, you know, that was really weird. You know, it's kind of like I knew, you know, that something was missing. So yeah, I watched my mother basically like suffer. I watched herself make herself suffer for giving up my brother. I suffered the consequences, and so did my sister in some sort of ways as well. My mother and my stepfather would drink, and they did not get along when they were drinking. They did not. I remember one time we were living in Park Forest and my mother and father, they were supposed to go grocery shopping, but they wound up going out to the bar. They were coming home and he tried to kill my mother in her car and flipped the car into the ditch. She came running in the house, screaming, telling me he tried to kill me, tried to kill me. And I was like, who tried to kill you? I'm not even thinking him. She's like, you know, Michael, which is my stepfather's name. And I was like, wow, that's insane. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife, grabbed her, went into my bedroom and locked the door. I was waiting for him, like terrified, but I was like, I have to protect my mother because that's what my grandmother told me. Protect your mother. She knew my stepfather was abusive. And, you know, watching him abuse her when we still lived in my grandmother's house, I wrote him a letter. And I told him, I was like, you need to leave my mom alone. You need to go away. I remember I was sleeping in the living room, laying there, pretending like I was sleeping. And I heard him get up. He was a truck driver, so he would wake up at like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And I heard him like getting his coffee and everything like that. And then I heard the crinkling of the paper, like he balled it up and he went to go throw it away. And then he knew I was sleeping in the living room. So he went over there and I remember he had this big, like, it looked like a class ring, like a high school ring, and he punched me straight in the lip. I think I was 8, 9 years old. And I woke up like, well, I was up already, but I got up like I was shocked. You know what I mean? Like I was shocked. Nobody had ever done that to me ever in my life. And I started screaming. My grandmother woke up, my mother woke up, and they were like frantic and they were like, what happened? And I can't even tell you the conversation, but I do know that he wound up in jail. After that, he called my mother and my mother took him back. And I was upset and scared because I was just like, if this guy can do this once, he's gonna do it again. What's to stop him? Who's to stop him? My mother couldn't stop him. My grandmother was too old. My grandfather wasn't alive. I didn't really have anybody to protect me. And this is where, like the resentment towards my father came in because my father left when I was young. I would be highly upset because I was like, why, and around that time I had already knew that my mom gave up my brother and I was just like, why didn't you give me up? Why didn't you give me to my dad? If this is a life that you were going to choose for me, why didn't you just give me to my dad? I was probably 11 and when she told me, she's like, oh, your dad's an a-hole and he doesn't love you, he doesn't this, he doesn't that. It's not cool. It's not something that you should tell your kid at 11, but I can't say anything because I know that with my repeat of trauma and everything like that, all the generational stuff, I've said some hurtful things to my kids, and we'll get there. But right now we're just going to take a short little intermission and we'll be back with part 2. Thank you.